thanks everyone for coming here at the inaugural, or first from the Source conference. We're honored to be here. My name is Adair, and I am the president at Volexity.
Sean Koessel, vice president at Volexity, and despite the titles, we still, like Aaron said, we get our hands dirty, we do the work, so we're not just up here taking credit for other people's work, although the team at Volexity did help a lot with this as well in the investigations.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about today very hands-on, both of us, but obviously, yeah, a lot of other people in the room here from our threat intel team and IR spent a lot of countless hours on this particular event or incident. The title talk gives away a little bit. It's called the Nearest Neighbor Attack, how a Russian APT weaponized nearby Wi-Fi for covert access. It's a bit of a mouthful. But we're not gonna just jump into like the end. You can kind of surmise, or some of you maybe have heard bits and pieces from us where this is going. But our presentation today is going to kind of tell you about one of the more interesting engagements that we've ever worked on. For us, that's usually saying a lot too. So we've had some that are very memorable for us, either because they're unique, novel, they're complicated, the attacker's doing something brazen, or we've never seen before, or no one's ever seen before. This one kind of fits in that category pretty well, and it's really up there in like our top 2, 3 of being interesting. What we're going to talk about today took place in early 2022, and we believe that actually has a lot of relevance because it was just before the invasion of Ukraine. This isn't a big geopolitical talk, but I believe that's the impetus for the activity we're going to talk about. And then it's got a couple of fun components. Use of a zero-day, which we'd kind of learn about a little bit later, maybe years later. A skilled threat actor kind of living off the land, so not necessarily deploying malware and all that exciting stuff. And then kind of really, which from the title, an innovative way to gain access to a target's network. And then kind of as reference to cyber espionage goal, but with a geopolitical reason behind it, which we see stuff stolen, people attacked all the time, but this is very timely and interesting about when it occurred. So this incident, we're going to walk through how we saw it, how we worked on it, and we're going to cut out a lot of stuff because just the first act of activity I could spend an hour on, just like the first day, let alone what happened over weeks. So it started off with us receiving an alert from a custom EDR, I say signature, but this was a Carbon Black Defend product. It's like old Confer. You can't actually create signatures in it, but you can run queries at your leisure. We had some really nice queries that we ran. Some people in here helped set this up, and Tom specifically. We had a query that ran and looked for various different things, and it triggered on February 4th, 2022. So this is a couple years old, but it's a story we've never really told before. And we probably will have a blog in maybe a week or two, sometime. But this involved a bat file being executed at the root of program data. So not the most stealthy thing, not something you necessarily want to see happening. It's a little bit suspicious, right? Like if anyone does IR, this is not something that normally happens, at least in most environments. And if it hasn't happened for years and it suddenly happens, usually an odd sign, especially when it's invoking reg.exe. So we kind of started our investigation off with this alert. Hey, what is this? I've never seen this before. I don't really have a lot of context. We jump in the EDR. And similarly, we start our process, which we do a lot of our customers, which is to kick off a memory collection and selective file collection. So as we're kind of diving in or jumping in a little bit, we start looking through like some of the activities that's happening. And we can't give you every command that was run because it would take too long. But basically, registry hives from the system were being dumped. And then a PowerShell command was ran with this big one-liner that took all that data, compressed it, and put it in a zip file, staging it for exfil. So classic attacker activity designed to steal stuff. The next line, it's a lot of text there, but basically we kind of kept walking backwards, found a user account where a file called defragmentserve.zip was created. Inside it was a bat file, another executable, and it kind of really kicked off this process and a whole bunch of the activity that ensued. Those file names you see later on will be kind of relevant to like our attribution phase of this, along with our next slides here, where we say the Waze goose is loose. One of the other interesting items that kind of came up when we were looking through like the EDR telemetry of what happened on this system was a file called wazegoose52.dll had been created. And it had been created in like a fake Adobe directory. So it's the folder, SQL and program data. Adobe's like a real folder, but you see the small print up there. It was a folder called v3.80.15456. It's completely made up. It has nothing to do with Adobe. This is not a real folder, and it didn't exist on this system beforehand. So this is odd DLL. It's unsigned, which may or may not be like telling. There's a lot of unsigned DLLs and things that happen out there, but kind of part of the story. And then interestingly, which we never end up with a copy of this specifically, but the kind of description says It's a Waze Goose shim by BestSec, so we kind of believe that might be like the company name or what they wrote on there for themselves. So we don't know for sure. And then it was created by Spool Service, which is the Windows print spooler service on the system. So some of you, if you do a lot of exploits and everything, this might start to sound familiar, but it may not have sounded familiar, been something that made a lot of sense back then. We see a lot of injected code from different processes. It doesn't necessarily stand out as a particular important event, but it will play an interesting role later. It is kind of sound a little bit of a wild goose chase, running down different file names. There is some real thing called Waze Goose, but it has like nothing to do with the Windows operating system, and you can kind of, if you want to go search that later, you can have some nice, fun, light reading about Waze Goose. So memory collection underway, right? Some of you guys have heard of memory analysis before, I think, a few people in here. Maybe raise your hand if you're not familiar with memory analysis. So memory obviously is a big part of like what we do at Volexity. We want to get memory off of this, so we were looking to get a collection. As a customer, we've done a decent amount of IR with before, so I think at this point we already had working credentials. We were just like coordinating, getting the package ready, making sure they knew what we were doing. Like, hey, this stuff's going on. We're going to get a collection. Getting cohesive with the customer. And things are looking good. We kicked off the collection. We can do this from a network sensor we have in their office, in their data center, and collect over the LAN, start collecting the memory back to our sensor. That's how we operate. When we do that, we normally collect a bunch of different things. Obviously, system memory is first and foremost. We get various live response data as part of that, and then we get page files. There's different flags provided, and then we have a list of selective files that we get. So like we're in the MFT, Windows specific in this case, a Windows server. MFT, Windows event logs, registry hives. We'll say, give me everything in the C:users public. We have like a whole list of things that we grab where we're not trying to do a disk image, but we know these are things that we constantly or frequently want to get that'll kind of help us get stuff on the first try without doing a disk image. So we kick that off. And you'd say, what's like the number one thing I would not want to happen as this process is occurring? Well, imagine the customer you just told about this, that you're collecting this important memory. You've done a lot of IR before, and you're ready. And you're like, hey, this is very important. We get all this data. Then shuts down that computer right in the middle of your collection from it. So we have our collection process gives us feedback of like what the any system state or feedback from the system. So this is the literal copy and paste minus I changed some of the IP address from our surge collection where I went back to the screen. Nice going, it's cruising along. I don't know, it's been running for like 10 or 15 minutes. It's like 150 gigs of RAM. It's a big system. And then we see this. So they completely hosed up our memory collection. So I don't know if Sean has any fond memories of that.
It's not the first time it's happened. We've had multiple investigations that we've done, and just miraculously, the systems get rebooted in the middle of collection. I don't know why that happens.
Yeah, so this, I had a list earlier. It was like, hey, number of things you don't want to happen in memory collection. I was like, find out your wife's your sister, get hit by a car, house catch on fire, and then I put the worst one being system being shut down. So we had like a worst case scenario in many ways. So, but we still, hey, it's still important. Like we're still can, hey, fire that thing back up. Let's get a collection. Do we still want to get files? Let's select a file, the event logs, other stuff. There was actually a few artifacts still in memory. That when you get it quick enough, that it was still there. But no, there wasn't too much from the memory perspective. That was completely lost. We lost that. But we started looking at the system. Hey, we got a lot of evidence that we took from that EDR, right? We got these files being written, these folders. We got like a good set of data. I can't wait to get my hands on this. This is very recent too, right? This is like in the last like less than 2 hours. Like we're moving quickly. Teams like hyped up. But we also came across in that process that the attackers had run a file called cipher.exe, which I don't know how people have seen that. I had no idea. I never encountered this before. I don't think most of our team had either. And I don't know.
Yeah, it's a more obscure utility from like I think it's the Windows 2000 Server 2003 like resource pack, and cipher.exe can be used to encrypt and decrypt files, but it also can be used to basically securely wipe the unallocated or slack space. So the attackers were using this after they had run their utilities because they really did not want us recovering this stuff. So in addition to the reboot, the worst thing that could happen happening, they also are securely deleting the files that they're using. So.
Yeah, and doing it with a built-in Microsoft utility that I don't know, maybe we talked to a bunch of people. Most people hadn't run across this. We'd never seen it before. I mean, obviously it's a known tool. It's a legit tool, but kind of like an interesting way where they didn't have to put delete or some other like kind of tooling over there to or override it in different ways. So, but not all hope was lost here. We had some interesting entries. So we got the event logs, obviously. So we got certain data, and we did see, or actually, event logs had a little bit of data, and we still got think the RDP and all that activity didn't even show up in the EDR telemetry for some reason. So, but basically we had an unknown IP address that was initiating this activity. It was in the RDP events, logging into the computer. So that's a good point for us. We have a sensor on their network. We have internal visibility, we have ingress, egress to the internet, we have outside the firewall, inside the firewall. We're like, boom, this is gonna lead us to like the computer doing this. This is gonna be like an easy solve. Punch in the IP address. We can rapidly search like, hey, have we ever, anything it's ever talked to? Do you have indexed data, flow? Zero. Absolutely nothing showed up. I think we had that IP, maybe we had something that did something like, I don't know, like 8 months ago or something like that. And it didn't look relevant. And so we're kind of, okay, no internet traffic, no movement on the server, no traffic of any kind. So this IP is just kind of like a ghost. So we went to the customer, hey, what is this IP? They're like, oh man, I think that's like the VPN. We're like, oh my God, really? So temporarily kind of like got sidetracked. They're like, no, that's not the VPN. We don't know what it is. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we should probably know what that is. But the reality of like IRs is, depending on the situation and how you're engaged or not engaged in other things, you can have a close relationship and not everything gets like run down perfectly, just the nature of the way things work. So in short, the trail goes cold. So right, like I would love to have like spent my whole next like entire life figuring this out on that day going forward, but it went cold for a while. And then I'll let Sean pick up from here.
Yeah, so it is very frustrating. Like Steven said, we rarely have engagements where when we have network sensors on the network, it's like, we can find it. With that or other telemetry, we're gonna find it. And it's just like, what the hell, this makes no sense. How are we not seeing this? So anyways, we didn't see it, we're very frustrated. We just kind of sit and we wait for about a month, and then about a month later, we have these attackers coming back, these ghosts, the phantoms return, and all of a sudden they pop up with these very telltale signs of things that we have seen in the past, kind of at this customer, this kind of behavior where they're doing, volume shadow copies. So they're dumping the volume shadow copy, to grab a copy of, the registry hives and eventually probably do some sort of LSAS dump or something along those lines. So we have this long trail of very suspect activity occurring, and we know, okay, we've got something again. So let's go. We're going to investigate.
Don't forget the NTDS.dit they got in there.
NTDS.dit that they've gotten
very
probably
important.
multiple times from this customer, unfortunately. So we're thinking, all right, here we go again. So the investigation continues. We're looking at domain controllers now in focus. But the bad thing is they have no 4624s. So anybody who doesn't know what that is in Windows event log land, 4624s give you all the information that you're going to want and look at for activities relating to logging onto a computer. So whether that's RDP or a network login, that's all very useful stuff during an incident response. That was completely gone. It wasn't there. It wasn't being logged. Same thing with 4625s, which is a failure login. So one of the very key sources that we'd always use to investigate, we can't leverage that. We can't look into it at all. So that's, again, very frustrating. But what we can see is we can see commands being executed via scheduled tasks. But again, there's no data with this event log entry that shows like the account or the system where this stuff is coming from. It wasn't there. We weren't able to have that. So we worked with the customer. They actually, I think, worked with Microsoft to finally get their group policies in line, so they weren't stomping on each other, and the 4624s and 4625s were actually being logged. So that was good. That gave us something else, and in the process of that, we went and installed Sysmon on domain controllers and some other key systems just to kind of get even more logging. Because remember, at this point, we're coming in from an event where we have sensors, we have full network visibility, but we don't know where this IP is coming from. So we're just kind of throwing everything at it to log as much data as we possibly can. So the new activity occurs, we jump right in, we've got an IP address, it's same subnet as the activity that we previously saw, but we still have no network visibility into this stuff. It's really frustrating, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. Finally, the customer reveals that this is an IP address from their enterprise wireless pool. So okay, now we're making a little bit of progress, maybe. So the domain controllers serve up DHCP for this wireless stuff, but as we're investigating, the IP address is not in there. So there's no indication that that IP address was handed out through DHCP. Okay. Kool-Aid.
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit frustrating. You finally get something, and then it goes nowhere briefly. But it turns out the customer has a Wi-Fi controller. So think about a web interface you can log into. It shows you the status of your access points, their strength. I mean, it has a tremendous amount of information. I don't want to tell you the brand. It's, the brand though, if you want to, I'm not a, you use coupon code 10, my name's 10% to get. No, I don't want to tell you the brand, but like it's really cool. Like when we got access to it, we're like, wow, I wish I had known this back on February 4th. But we get in there and it's a lot of information about connected clients, the APs, where they are, all kinds of stuff. So we get in there and it's kind of like our first huge break. The attacker's IP, the IP that we had recently, it's in there. It's in the client list. It shows disconnected, but the disconnected timer when it was last seen is basically kind of when our activity stops. So we're like, okay, this is probably definitely related here. This is going to be kind of the, our guy, our person, whoever it is. And even better, it has a user account because, like I said, this is enterprise authentication. It uses a domain, an Active Directory account for their enterprise, authentication, and a MAC address. So we now have a MAC address tied to this. So we're like, wow, this is really great. This is like we have all kinds of information now that we didn't have before. So we say, hey, the username it's a real person, right? This is an account of an individual, new organization. This isn't I don't know if to be honest, service accounts and stuff could get on Wi-Fi or not, but it wasn't a service account, it was a real person. We asked them to check with the user, hey, were they in the office at this time? I don't know, maybe their machine is hacked and someone's using it, or I don't know, maybe they're a rogue employee. I don't think we really strongly suspected that. But the customer immediately indicated hey, I know, they know their user base. Hey, this person doesn't come into the office, they're a remote work. I don't think they lived across the country or anything, but they just this person doesn't really ever come into the office. I would be surprised if it was them. Not to mention, I don't know if you had it on the earlier slide, but this happened between 4 and 6 a.m. So it's a really odd time to be in this office in general. But they checked the badge logs. They have access to that. They checked the badge logs. No one had signed in. This user had not been in the office. So kind of ruled them out, and they just talked to the user on top of that. Hey, anything weird? You go into the office? Anything? No, I don't know anything. So okay, so this user account isn't involved. This person's system isn't believed to be involved. They're not personally involved as far as we can tell. But they say, hey, yeah, that enterprise auth, it's using Radius. It's okay. Now that we know it's wireless, we have a user account, we have Radius. Let's go get those logs. They're available. And it actually turns out they have a tremendous amount of data, and then they go back quite far, which is the opposite of what I would expect in a case like this. Usually everything makes you want to bang your head against the wall. And we're able to pivot on that. So we have the MAC address that we have, the IP address. We have all this information. Or I don't know if the IP showed up in those logs or not. But the MAC address and the username, boom, we find it. We see there, hey, they're connecting. They are connecting on wireless. They're authenticating. I mean, we already know this from the controller. And then that MAC address, we look back in time. Hey, that MAC address was also from our February 4th activity. It was February 2nd activity. It went back to January. And we went back to January. It was a different account name. We checked on that account. That user had changed their password recently. So someone is using multiple different accounts of this organization to get on the Wi-Fi, and basically led to a bunch of activity, which will kind of, we've described some of it, but ultimately, for the purposes of exfil. So the puzzle's kind of coming together here. We have this set of compromised account. We're figuring out, hey, how can we determine how this is happening, right? These people, but it's a lot of things. It could be getting phished. It could be they're using a default password. It's not in the slide, but I think later on we found both of them were using kind of defaults or weak passwords. But our investigation kind of led us to is we kind of know this environment pretty well. We went straight and looked at one of two places. Their VPN required MFA. No one was getting into that. We confirmed that. And then it wasn't being brooded against. And then we found this other web service. We were seeing brute force authentication that had started in late January through early February. And they compromised 2 accounts in that process. One of them was the account that we had seen in the Wi-Fi controller log. This is a service that the employees can access, but it requires MFA. So the attacker couldn't get into that point, but they were able to validate their credentials are valid. So they were doing password spraying against this web service, basically to find out yay, nay, to have a working cred. And they can't get on VPN with it. This service, they wouldn't get them into the network. It's something you wouldn't want them to get into, but not the end of the world. But it was a way for them to validate and crack credentials, of which now we're at basically 3. We had the one we found from Radius logs, and the 2 we just found, of which 1 we already knew about. So kind of expanding and growing a bit, what they're doing, how they're doing it.
And it was really having to marry together. So Stephen noticed that we have these entries in the Radius logs, and we're not long after we're seeing, as he's looking at that same user in the external internet-facing logs of this other service. Shortly after, we're seeing this stuff pop in the Radius log. So slowly but surely, it kind of starts to come together. And yeah, we look like this crazy guy from the office or whatever that is, and he's just running around. We're trying to pull these things together because at this point, this has been 2.5 months, and a lot of this stuff is moving slowly, getting access to the Radius logs. We didn't know about that until almost a month and a half in. It's so we finally get this stuff. We feel like we're making progress, and
yeah, this is Yeah, we're like, we look back at some of our chats, we're like yelling at each other, like getting all pissed off, like, you know. But yeah, so return to Wi-Fi, we dig in a bit deeper, right? So we're like, hey, what else can we figure out from here? Can we look for other weird systems, other MAC address, like just anomalies? Like, what can I even do this? I've never even been in one of these, this controller, this brand thing before. Like, what can we do? Start looking around. We figure out basically the attacker is connecting to the same 3 access points every single time. And it's a multi-floor building, spans a pretty large area. Turns out the 3 access points they're connecting to are in a conference room, and they're specifically, like they have a diagram like of the building of each floor. We know what floor it is, we know which access points, and we can see physically where, they basically map like I don't know what tooling they use, but it's like a floor plan, and it shows where they are. And they're all 3 in the conference room, and they're right by the window on the street with neighboring or adjacent buildings nearby. So clearly they're not in the middle of the building, they're not on the other side, they're specific access points these attacker is able to connect to. And they'd only done that for all of them. We can see this historically, like each time we can go back. I think there's like 90 or 180 days of logs. So I mean, like at the peak, I don't think we ever saw them going any further than January or so. But each time, same thing, same conference room.
Same X.
So yeah, time for a visit. So went out there, went to kind of new info, went to the customer. We're like, hey, could there be like a rogue device? And we're speculating like someone could be parked outside. I mean, it's legitimate. Can they check security cameras? I mean, the one set of activity was at 4 a.m. I bet you there's not a lot of like cars parked in front of your building between 4 and 6 a.m. They're like, yeah, we might actually do that. I'm gonna see if we can pull security for that. But we're looking for anything else we can find. Say, is there any other dual home devices? Is there something like sitting there in a conference room? Is there like an old, they have a TV with internet? We're like looking at all these things to see like which of these devices we recognize. Is there like a weird device, like one of those pineapple things plugged in?
Pineapple.
Yeah. Or like just something that's out of place, right? And we go into all the IP addresses, we can verify, we can see all these on our sensor. Maybe our network visibility is lacking. Every device we check, we could see it. Right at the end of like this, like walking this floor, he goes, oh, our MSP for this one division, they have a device that's sitting in this closet and it's like nearby. And we're like, oh my gosh, really? Like yeah, and this is like, it uses a separate circuit to go out to the internet. Mind you, as I didn't go into, is spent like hours like looking through every packet when this stuff was happening, trying to see like, I can't see what this IP is doing, but it's got to be coming in or out of the network. Could it be like in a Dropbox connection, a Microsoft? So we're like, oh, maybe that explains why we couldn't find anything on the network, even when we just looked at the internet traffic, like just of the whole network at the time the attacker was active, because they were issuing commands and doing stuff, right? So it's got to be leaving the network. This thing routes out. I'm like, oh my God, this has got to be it. No, it just turns out they had some other weird, like, screwed up setup. Absolutely nothing to do with the case. But this device was sitting there. We worked with them to get that circuit put into, like, we didn't even know about this circuit. Small circuit. They got, like, a small Verizon line or something. So we're getting that feed now. But, yeah, we're kind of, like, losing our mind here. But we knew we didn't have the network visibility, right? We talked about this from early on. So we said, hey, we need that Wi-Fi. We need to get that access from those Wi-Fi devices. And they're like, oh, yeah. Problem is it's routing through here, and some of those devices, like it just like connects right into the switch. That's why it's not going to like the port mirrors we have set up. So they set up some additional port mirroring. They rerouted one thing, so now we have full visibility on anything Wi-Fi. So we had a good explanation as why we couldn't see it before. It was like it sucked that that's the way the setup was, but it's just how it was. And there was really, unless we were investigating something, like no way for us to really notice or surface it amongst the millions of connections that happen in a day throughout years. This is the first time this had come up. So they fixed that. And now we're like, well, obviously we had a compromised credential, reset it. We're like, do you do the full password reset? Where you don't even know exactly what's going on, what they've gotten. Obviously we've advised this, but they can't move forward with certain things. Hey, can you change? It's like this stuff. You could have solutions. It just doesn't mean they can implement them in like a day, a week, or even a month sometimes. So, but yeah. So now we're like, oh well, now it's time to wait. We got better visibility. Like we're just gonna wait and see what happens next. So our investigation expanded a little bit while we were doing this. So, like I said, we can't put like this. We're going way over time by the time we're done with this. So we can't. There's only so much we can put in this deck. But like some of what we saw, what they were doing is they were going after specific individuals as an organization that were working on matters related to Ukraine, and they were taking email, they were taking documents, they were taking stuff related to. Like I can't say like they knew everything they're but basically stuff related to their work on Ukraine. This Staff probably started a little bit after, probably in March, like after the invasion of Ukraine, but they set up this access and took note of this organization and basically set the table to do all this, basically approximately like 2.5, 3 weeks before, I think, yeah, maybe about maybe about 3 weeks before the invasion, and they specifically, clearly were going after people and things related to Ukraine and what they were doing. So kind of had like an idea of like what threat actor we might think this is at this point. And this place had several run-ins in the past with multiple Russian threat actors, but mainly what's known as APT 29 or cozy larch as we call them. But we kind of, we found that they were primarily exfilling this data that we're seeing over the Wi-Fi. We believe, like, hey, they go in there, they do stuff, and it just disappears, and we don't have any other access to it. We did find a couple instances where they were staging stuff on a public-facing web server and downloading it, which is like a typical model that we see. That did give us some IP addresses and some other things. A lot of times it was either like ExpressVPN or PIA. In one case, we did have an IP address that looked like it was potentially a VM they had stood up, and that was provided to the appropriate people for investigation outside of us. But outside of that, we really didn't see a lot of the exfil activity or IPs or anything we could really tie to them. Fully living off the land for the most part. Obviously, they had a couple of things that they were running kind of interesting, and that tooling that they dropped that kicked off some of the activity early on, the Waze Goose and other stuff. I mean, they brought that. But no web shells, no backdoors, they're on web servers, no malware deployed, nothing at all. So kind of like a pretty skilled actor who's very confident in their ability to do what they're doing right now.
And stay pretty much undetected. So they were very easily able to, come back with this same technique. So they return, but they failed. They're unsuccessful because the account that they had been using, we had the customer change the password. So that has been changed. Passwords changed, but they quickly go get another account. So using the same method where we're looking at the external logs on the external service and marrying that up with the radius logs, and quickly we're able to see that they had a new account. And likely what we're assuming is they're using password spray and they're incrementing passwords. So your typical like summer 2022 and then now become summer or fall 2022. So they're just kind of changing the password, and they're finding the weakest ones, and then they're popping back in. And this is still the part that we can't figure out. Assuming like they're walking through the walls, they're just coming in out of nowhere after they do this. But this time we have our visibility finally fixed. We have all the Wi-Fi information. So we're really excited when this happens, when they come back. I think Steven was on his way to drop his kids off. I think I had just got back from dropping my kids off to school. Everybody's just kind of like rustling around in chat. They come back. We go grab the PCAP for the new session that they had established with the new account that they had cracked. And we open that up. There's not a whole lot of activity in there, but what there was in there, that was our faces. We're looking at this like, oh, I think we've got it now. I think we're there. So what happens is we can clearly see in this PCAP, there are NBNS requests. And these NBNS requests are broadcasting computer names and in some cases like Active Directory information. So in that PCAP, we can clearly see, it's very obvious, like screaming at us, like what the organization name was, where they're connecting in from. So now we have this place, we'll call it Organization 1, that's in the building right next door. So we have same physical proximity, offices, shared space, like leased offices, and we can see that they're connecting into our customers' Wi-Fi from that network.
Yeah, so at this point, our investigation has taken a nice turn for, we have someone getting on the Wi-Fi. We know the organization.
We know where they're coming from.
And we, instead of just showing up randomly, knocking on their door and saying, hey, you've got some hackers on your Wi-Fi breaking into my thing, we went through a trusted contact who knew someone at the organization. It proved pretty successful. I drove back down to DC. I was flying out for vacation 4 hours from then. They made me sit outside for over an hour and a half while they talked with HQ to decide if they wanted to let me in. And I was like, if I just wasted, I'm going to think about this nonstop during my vacation, and I'm going to have wasted like hours of my time coming out here for nothing. So fortunately, I think I signed like an NDA that we wouldn't like, it was more about like we wouldn't like put, share who they were, their evidence, or any of that data, the high level stuff. But yeah, we got authorization basically to come in, do some forensics. They ultimately decided they trusted us, that I was a nice enough face that they weren't going to turn me away. And what we learned going in is obviously also a bridge there for quite a while. My vacation was the next day. My wife was mad because I wasn't helping pack, and I stayed there very late. And sorry, correct that. Yeah, it was a Saturday. This was a Friday, and it was a Saturday morning flight. So obviously, we knew the attacker to breach Org 1, which we're talking about. Privileged credentials moving around their network. We started looking. They didn't have a lot of computers on there. Mind you, from what we just showed you a second ago, Above it, not in the red is like the one above it that's not highlighted in red, that's actually the computer name of the system connecting in. So we have a computer name, we go, and I say, hey, do you know this computer name? They're like, no, but there's only like 5 computers in the place that's turned on. All the rest of them are off, or the people haven't been in the office in a while. It's a small office. We find that computer pretty quick. We actually go and look at all of them. They tell us they got, they're like, oh yeah, last week we got a CrowdStrike alert for like a VSS admin activity and stuff. And I was like, what did you guys do with it? They're like, well, we just kind of, it blocked it. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And that may not be verbatim what they said. They're a nice organization. I don't want to make fun of them. Too late, I guess. But what we basically found is like, yes, we ended up in the machine we wanted to. As we looked around, we found the attackers had gotten credentials and were connecting to their single-factor VPN. We can see evidence of that in the log. So the attacker had the ability to go directly into them from VPN. But they had their own wireless control of a different brand, but it actually showed the attackers had authenticated and gotten onto their network via Wi-Fi from another organization, which was also in the building on a different floor. That's not covered in here, but we ended up working with that org and kind of got a bit of a dead end there, but they clearly had multiple different organizations Wi-Fi compromised. We're basically able to move, how did it start? No idea, but we can confirm that. So we get over to the computer, they're moving laterally. We know the name from PCAP, as we mentioned. And we find this is like the crux of this whole attack, and this is what makes it so interesting. There's nothing necessarily fully complicated about understanding this attack. Putting in motion is another thing. So the system connecting to our customer's Wi-Fi from Organization 1 turned out to be a laptop that was plugged into a docking station that has an Ethernet cable in it. So it gets its internet from a hardwired Ethernet connection, not using wireless. The attacker makes their way to that laptop, which isn't using Wi-Fi, RDPs in, turns Wi-Fi on, and goes and targets our customer's network. Now they're using those credentials that they had stolen. They're on a network that's in physical proximity to pick up the Wi-Fi, enterprise Wi-Fi, and using those credentials on the network and basically do their operations from like someone who's just nearby. They're not in the parking lot, as far as we know, and they're not nearby. They're on the other side of the world, and they're doing this by moving around in another organization.
Remotely.
So we have the nearest neighbor attack illustrated. I think most people probably kind of understand that, but with some beautiful slides. Crystal did a lot of hard work over here. It gave us these awesome slides. The text, you didn't reject the text. So as I said, it started with a motivated attacker living in Russia who dreams big. He had big dreams, or her, big aspirations of wanting to hack someone across the world. And they're very successful at this already, but maybe they want to do something new, right? They're looking for a change, a new way to do it. So they target an organization, and like the exact workflow of like how did they get here? Is it opportunity? They start from another organization. Like obviously we don't know. We don't know. They went from no access to what? Is it like on opportunistic? They hacked a VPN and they got in and started this. Did they start with wanting to target an organization? We don't actually know the answer to that because that would require us to back this up, maybe months or years. No idea. But they've identified a targeted organization in the United States. This could replay obviously anywhere in the world. It could be in your same city, but like across the block. It could be in Asia. It could be Europe, wherever. And the target's located in Washington, thousands of miles away from the attacker, right? We have them over there in Russia. We'll explain the attribution in a little bit. They identify their target, who's in this building. But they have no way to get in there, right? Hey, this VPN's multi-factor. They've brute force. They found working credentials, right? If this place had a single-factor VPN, or maybe they just worked hard enough to like get the people to phish their multi-factor authentication or get them to hit accept on their multi-factor. Maybe they would get in, but they decided not to play that game. They had no other avenue, no way, and they looked for another avenue. So they find organizations, the nearest neighbors, as we call them. Some people wanted to call this the naughty neighbor attack.
Naughty neighbor attack, yeah.
Nearest neighbor won out. I won't say who wanted naughty neighbor and who didn't, but it's me. Some people thought it might invoke the wrong after night television show or something. So they identify these offices in close physical proximity, right? These are the nearest neighbors in a separate building. And they don't have to be in a separate building, but they have to be nearby, obviously, right, with signal strength. So the attacker compromised networks of 2 neighboring organizations, right? We knew about Org 1. We 100% know more or less what they were doing and how they're doing it. Org 2, we know they were using their network because of MAC addresses and other things. We don't know exactly how they were doing it or why, and that one kind of hit a little bit of a dead end, unfortunately. So they get into both of those, and they kind of explain this process. Just all you need to know is they had working credentials, but they found an org, our victim organization, our customer, a way that they could validate credentials and see things that would actually work, that would work on an enterprise Wi-Fi. They check it out, they validate it. Hey, I got blocked, but now I have working creds. They go on there and they say, hey, I'm going to go on the hunt for these systems. I broke into these organizations, but I need to find that machine that's online, that's dual home. That's the critical part of this, right? Can't be like just on Wi-Fi already. They'll disconnect. I don't know if there's some like tooling that you can connect to 2 Wi-Fis at once. I'm not like a Wi-Fi expert. Maybe that's possible. But they're specifically looking for someone with Ethernet plugged in, and they did it. They found it. Like hats off to them. They did a good job. Dual home with Ethernet and Wi-Fi, and then basically they move into org 1, and the process of basically what we described happens here. They get in and they go to town, and basically all the items that we just talked about, the whole engagement, the whole hacking, this is what the precursor to that, what it led to, and how they kind of like stayed off the radar. Obviously, there's a mix of like not having the right visibility in some places, some logging that we turned on. I mean, you'll find that a lot of environments aren't perfect, and that's things you have to deal with, like imperfect. You have to come up with new solutions to these imperfect problems and so on these networks. But basically, they were able to turn that around, in some cases do that within like 30 minutes. Hey, that cred didn't work. I brute forced a new one. I moved around. I connected in. Like they were very efficient with their operations.
And they also had like custom tooling that they would use from those like org 1 systems. So it was a custom script that they had when they'd get on that machine that would basically set up the Wi-Fi, find the wireless networks in range, and then connect into those systems. So then they were just able to leap right over. Some other things that we don't have in the slides there. So when we were looking at that system, we also could see the layout of they were doing reg dumps and LSAS dumps on that system too. The file extensions and the naming convention on that system was the same that we were seeing in the customer's environment. So we had a pretty good idea that it was the same attacker that was doing this, nearest neighbor, naughty neighbor leap between buildings.
And then attribution. You go and walk through this, Sean. I think also I've heard we have 5 minutes here.
Okay, we'll go through this quickly. So not too long ago, back in April, Microsoft releases a blog, and as I'm skimming through it, I see this thing that I can't forget, Waze Goose. It pops up. I'm like, whoa, holy cow! How would we ever see anything like that? We ran across that, so we go and we start talking about it. We start reading the blog, and it's one for one like the things that we are seeing in our investigation. It's like the exact same batch file that is listed in the article, the same goose egg binary that was in the article as well. So we're reading through it and we're like, oh, this is great. This pieces back together some of the pieces of the puzzle because, remember, our system was rebooted and they deleted stuff securely, so we could not get the full chain, unfortunately. But, thanks to Microsoft, we're able to know what that was and know that it was a privilege escalation exploit that they had been using back.
I mean, it's to the T. This exact command we showed earlier about like zipping up, that exact command about the reg, sam.save and compressing it, same thing. Yep. Hey, the tooling uses Waze Goose, and then a random 2 digits.dll. We had 52, so it all aligned quite nicely. But and also remember, this is a privilege escalation exploit that was a 0-day. This was patched in October 2022. I think Microsoft mentioned seeing it in April, and they said maybe as early as like December the previous year. And we definitely saw it in February. So we know, probably there's supposition it was being used before that. It's probably accurate. We know at least by February. And that's why it kind of came out of nowhere. They did use a 0-day to get that activity on the machine, all that Waze Goose stuff.
Yep. Yeah, so the past targeting, it's pretty clear from our standpoint that it's the same threat actor that's responsible for it. Volexity, tracks it as Cozy Larch, or was it Gruesome Larch? Gruesome Larch is a threat actor name. So that really kind of pulled that together for us from the attribution perspective. We're able to kind of finally see, initially, like Stephen had said, we were thinking maybe APT 29, but after we see this blog, that Microsoft put out drop, it kind of all that lined up, and we're able to kind of attribute that attack chain to Gruesome Larch.
Cool. And then just a few more slides. Remediation efforts. So obviously, there's a lot going on. We're condensing a lot of activities and back and forth and interesting things to do. But remediation efforts, obviously, were recommended along the way. Hey, take that offline, wipe that, reset all this with varying levels of like, can we do this? When can we do it? Are we sure? The typical stuff. But ultimately, a mass password reset was done. Various changes to enterprise Wi-Fi were done. Some of the guest network stuff, which we don't get time to talk about here, but the attacker actually came back a final time. They had one last hurrah, and they did a really good job again, where they got on the guest. They remediated all the stuff with the credentials and took some actions on their enterprise network. Attacker got on the guest network. There's exactly one system on that entire network of all the IPs that bridged the two networks. It was something that guests needed to interface with the corporate
system or something.
So it kind of had a scheduling, and it straddled both networks. They were able to get onto it and move. So they came out of nowhere again. We found them on the guest network. Basically, just imagine everything we just talked about, but like kind of like with cheat codes. Got them shut off again. Thank God they weren't didn't deploy ransomware or something crazy that would really ruin our day. But yeah, so they kind of repeat the process. But yeah, I mean, they kind of pivot back. They got on the network briefly, but hey, remediation efforts were pretty successful. This was contained and limited, but they did some cool stuff where they were kind of running netsh commands to proxy stuff, which is actually what a Chinese APT group was doing right around that time. So we're like, oh, did we get this wrong? But we can talk about that another day. We'll try and cover it in the blog. And then basically kind of our last slide is defending against these attacks, right? So how can you fight against this, right? So obviously using MFA or cert-based authentication can go a long way, right? If that attacker had to do MFA to get on the Wi-Fi or had that supply a specific certificate, these aren't things that are gonna necessarily 100% stop it with someone this motivated, but probably a pretty good job. And then obviously because of that last thing we just talked about, guest public lesser trusted Wi-Fi networks, which usually it is for a lot of places, should either be properly fully segmented DMZ style, versus what it normally gets set up as, or just on its own internet link, like that thing we found when I went on site. Sometimes consider dialing down the strength, some of those things to make the signal a little weaker, so it's harder to pick up from far away. And then this is the obscurity one, but this place's Wi-Fi name was their organization, right? If it had just been I don't know, Waze Goose Wi-Fi, maybe they would have not connected to it. I'm not sure, but yeah, there's some possible solutions there. I think we're probably running up on time. We're good. I don't think we have to, someone correct me if I'm on time for questions, but you can come find us in between, and then our emails and other ways to contact us if you don't know are on the screen. So yeah, we thank you very much.
Thank you.